also been meaning to mention that episode 2 of my new series, Real History, is out right now. And in this episode, we talk about the history of the American Indian and the real story of the American Indians, which is a theme that we've talked about. We come back to that on the show quite a bit. It's something that's important to me, which is making the case that we, in fact, do not live on stolen land, that we deserve to live here, that we built this country. It was not, this whole story of a country built on oppression and subjugation of so-called indigenous people is not true. And in the second episode, we deal with this, with that whole thing. We lay out the real history of the American Indians and of the Indian Wars and all the rest of it. So here's a clip from that episode where we talk about why the Indians were called savages. And today we're told that, well, that was all just pure bigotry and racism. But there is a reason for that. In fact, they earned that moniker. Listen. So just how savage were the Indians? We'll get into specific details of some of these raids, but for now we can focus on perhaps the most gruesome detail of all: evidence of cannibalism among American Indian tribes. According to Keeley's book, War Before Civilization, at 25 sites in the American Southwest, anthropologists have discovered cannibalized human remains dated from roughly the year 900 to 1300, hundreds of years before Columbus arrived. We know they were consumed because the assemblages of disarticulated bones share a number of features: butchering cut marks, skulls broken, long bones smashed for marrow extraction, bones burned or otherwise cooked, and disposal with other kitchen refuse. And there's a lot more to it than that. If you watch the episode, you'll find we go into gruesome detail about what the European pioneers and settlers and then Americans discovered when they came across these native tribes. And that is, and it doesn't really matter where they came across them. If we're talking about, continental United States or the Mesoamerican tribes, we're talking about South America. All across the hemisphere, I mean, even up into the Arctic, the encounters with, the Eskimos, the Inuit, as we call them now, you find this sort of thing, just brutal savagery. And this is the story across the entire hemisphere. And there's a reason for getting into it. It's not just for shock value. That's not what it's about. It's to give you a sense of what it was like, what they were dealing with when they were trying to build a civilization. I mean, you get to this part of the world, you want to build a civilization here where one previously did not exist, and it advanced modern civilization for its time. And but what you're encountering are these tribes that are living 5,000 years in the past. 10,000 years, even in some cases. And when you actually look at the history and you look at what these tribes were doing, the whole story, the whole narrative about the noble savage, these peaceful people, Pocahontas, right, singing to the birds and the bees and the trees, all of that melts away, and you see how utterly absurd it was. And you also begin to understand, there's so much emphasis that's been put over the last many decades on empathizing with the native people, the so-called indigenous people. We have to be empathetic to them. We have to understand their plight. And there's been so much emphasis put on that. Nobody ever talks about being empathetic or trying to understand in context the settlers who came here, the Westerners, and what it was like for them. See this through their perspective. I mean, just imagine what it's like. You cross an ocean, you come to this new land that you've never seen, you know nothing about. There are no maps. You have no context for it. It's a wilderness, mostly an empty wilderness, by the way. Most of the hemisphere was empty. wide swaths of land that were empty, not claimed by anybody. And that's often forgotten. You don't know what to expect. And then you encounter, again, without any context, it's really hard for us to put ourselves in this mindset because of all the context we have now, because of all these things we take for granted. And all the kind of dogmas that we have that are ingrained in us, embedded in us. You know, the idea of like universal human equality. Everybody is equal. That's a really modern notion. And people 500 years ago, 400 years ago, 300 years ago, they didn't have that. They didn't take that for granted. So you don't have any of that framework in mind, right? You don't have any of that kind of scaffolding. And you get here and you encounter people who are running around naked or in loincloths, murdering each other brutally, and in some cases, eating each other. What conclusions would you draw about these people? What language would you use to describe them? Would you conclude that they are savages? Yeah, I think so. And when you try to actually be empathetic in that way and understand things from their perspective, what you realize is that actually, in many cases, it's the lack of brutality on the part of the European and American settlers is pretty surprising and admirable. There was much more restraint than people realize. And in fact, much more restraint on the side of the Europeans and the Americans than on the side of the Indian tribes. Anyway, we get into all this in the episode and in much more detail. But in order to watch it, you have to become a subscriber. So go to DailyWire.com, become a subscriber. You can watch. You can support what we do. We can't do things like this. It actually takes a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of effort to put together things like this. And can't do it without your support. So go to DailyWire.com and subscribe. Become a member, support the show. And that will do it for the show today. We'll end it there. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.